Yes. Hi, Adam. Can you hear us?
I can. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Good
So,
to talk to you.
so I'm joined here by Gary and James Robbins. They'll chip in as well. So we've been talking about Kolo Muani. The deal was announced at 8 o'clock tonight. For me, who better to talk to than top Serie A commentator, Adam Summerton. I don't know how many of the, what have I got here, 22 apps, 10 goals you saw of him, but you would have seen a fair bit. What are we getting?
He's a good player. I like him, and I know that Juventus were very keen to keep him. In fact, they've spent most of the summer trying to keep him, to be honest, but just couldn't reach an agreement with PSG, which has gone all the way down to the wire. So I think at Juventus, I know Juventus fans are disappointed that they're not keeping him. It was a bit of a mixed spell that he had at Juventus because he started off like a house on fire, really. He joined at the end of January, for people who maybe don't know. That was under Thiago Motta, and he scored on his debut. That was a loss to Napoli. He then scored, well, he scored in his first three games. He ended up with 5 goals from his first three games. So people are thinking, wow, this guy settled brilliantly. And at the time, they were lacking a bit of a cutting edge. So I think that he helped provide that and maybe was a bit of a game changer in that respect. But then there was a real dry spell and he didn't score for, I think it was 11 games.
It'll fit right in.
And of course, then people were then questioning the situation and why wasn't he scoring goals. But I think you have to take into account that Juventus were a very up and down side last season. They were lacking consistency. And then, of course, we ended up with Thiago Motta, who'd only come in at the start of the season, ended up losing his job. And so it probably wasn't the easiest of sides to play in. Particularly for a centre forward. But he ended up with 10 goals and 3 assists in 22 appearances. So if you look at the overall piece, although he had that 11-game spell where he didn't score, he then found some form again in terms of goals towards the end of the season. But there was also that change in manager with Igor Tudor coming in. And Igor Tudor, to begin with, seemed to prefer Vlahovic as his central striker. So there's a lot to take into consideration in terms of his time at Juventus. But in terms of the type of player, I think he's somebody who can stretch defences. He's somebody who can hold the ball up. He carries the ball well. He dribbles with the ball well. I think he can combine with others. He's an exciting player. I mean, I suppose you probably already talked or looked at his goal record, which is a mixed bag. And he's somebody that's been around lots of different divisions for somebody who's still fairly young. But I think he's an exciting signing for Spurs and part of what could be quite a dynamic and fun to watch forward line and proactive forward line as well. I think it's quite exciting what they're doing at Spurs, actually, in terms of the forward line.
I was going to ask you that. 2022, he signed for Frankfurt. He went to PSG. He had a spell at Juve. So Spurs are his, fourth club in 3 years. For him, does he need to settle? This just looks like a straight loan. Do you think he needs to settle? And do you think he can take all those attributes into the Premier League?
Yeah, I'd certainly be confident that he could take those attributes that I saw at Juventus into the Premier League. I don't see why not. I mean, I had a look at his record before I came on to talk to you, and I mentioned that he's been in several leagues. If you think he's been in 3 of the top 5 European leagues before he's even been to England. So in France, it was 21 goals in 79 league appearances with Nantes. Then in the Bundesliga, 16 goals in 34 league appearances with Eintracht Frankfurt. Then back to France with PSG, 8 goals in 36 league games. Italy, 8 goals in 16 league games. And we'll see what he can do in England. But I think the PSG situation or his time there is difficult to assess because there was a falling out with the coach who he just didn't seem to see eye to eye with. I mean, that's why he was always going to leave in this window, whether it was to Juventus or somebody else. They just had to get him out of the club because he wasn't going to play. Luis Enrique had made that clear. So, as I say, in terms of assessing that time in his career, you really do have to take that relationship with Luis Enrique into account. But you also have to, I suppose, look at the fact that he's a player that PSG were prepared to pay 95 million euros for not that long ago at all. So they obviously saw plenty in him. And as I say, I think if you to look at the attributes that he has, he is a centre forward with a lot of attributes, and I could see him working quite well with some of the players that Spurs already have, people like Johnson and Kudus. And potentially Simons as well. It's a forward line that should have a lot of creativity and a lot of goals in it. If I were a Spurs fan, I'd be pretty excited by it, by what you have there. Obviously, Xavi Simons is another. I think you said you might want to speak about him as well. But
tell us. I mean, on your travels, Ad, you've done so many games, national games, and across so many countries. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, well, I saw him. I didn't see much of him in Germany, so I'll say that. But I did see him a couple of times live in Holland, actually at PSV. And I liked him. I really liked him. I watched a game where PSV beat Arsenal, and he was one of the best players on the pitch. They had Cody Gakpo then as well. Both of them were in the team then. And his technical ability, his close control, his balance when on the ball, really, really good. I remember watching him at the time, and I thought this kid's not going to be playing in the Eredivisie for too much longer. And I thought he probably would make the leap to the Premier League sooner than he has done. But obviously, I think sometimes for players coming from the Eredivisie, it does make sense to go to another league before the Premier League because it is a significant leap. And we've seen a real mixed bag of results, haven't we, with players who've gone directly from the Eredivisie to the Premier League. So and that was probably quite sensible in terms of career progression. My only concern about Xavi Simons is his size, because he is quite slight physically, and that would be my only concern with him, with the physicality of the Premier League. To give you an example, someone like Dan Ndoye, who I saw in Italy last season, one of his biggest strengths was how hard he was to get off the ball in Serie A. And Serie A has become a fairly physical league. It's a lot more high intensity than it was years ago. And I've already noticed that he's finding that more difficult in the Premier League. So when I can compare them directly, you see. So that would be my only concern, but he is technically able perhaps to overcome that. And I suppose that it's something you can work on, isn't it, in terms of your physique and things like that. But in terms of his ability on the ball, it's a seriously exciting player.
Jumping back to Kolo Muani, I want to preface this because I am leaning on concerns, even though for years I've rated Kolo Muani quite highly. As I said earlier, any Frankfurt forward, pretty good. But my concern is we're going to come up against a lot of tight defences, packed defences. Against Bournemouth, that was part of what we struggled against, especially towards the end of the game. Kolo Muani is a very transitional player. How do you think he can handle those packed defences? Because we're going to see him up front and on the wing. Do you think that's a facet of his game that he can handle? Or do you think that, he needs to transition, he needs space?
Well, he's somebody, if you look at his best assets, I think you're right in that he carries the ball really well, dribbles with the ball really well. So, yes, I take your point on that. But, I mean, his record in the league in Serie A, albeit it's a small sample size, was 1-2. And of course, there are plenty of times when Juve were coming up against teams who would play where they would be expected to break them down, and Juve would have a lot more of the ball. I mean, I can recall him scoring against Empoli.
Recording in progress.
Early games, and remember him scoring against Como as well. So I do think he has the skill set to be able to do that, and I think as well you have got people there who can unlock the door and create chances too. I think there is, as I've said earlier, there's a lot of creativity in that Spurs side, and you've got players who should be able to whip crosses over to him as well. I mean, I remember watching Porro several times last season, and when I was covering Tottenham in the Europa League quite a bit, and I really enjoyed his crossing ability. I think I looked up the stats, and he was, I think at one point, I don't know if he ended the season, but there was certainly a point where he was putting in more crosses than anybody else in the entire Premier League. So I think Spurs have got different they've got different weapons, different ways of opening a team up, and different ways to service a centre forward. And I think one of the good things about him is his versatility as a player. He's somebody that can play wide himself if required. He can play off as like a support striker. He can play as the lead striker. He can stretch defenses. He can come a little bit shorter, and other players can play off him. So has quite a broad skill set as a centre forward, and can bring other teammates into play and be part of quite a fluid forward line too.
Did he play exclusively down the middle for Juve?
No, there was. I can remember some occasions where Vlahovic started and he started behind him. I'm trying to remember whether I saw any games where he started off wide. I can't remember. The majority of the time, I think he started up front. But I've seen him play at other times where he's played slightly wide, and as I say, he can play as more of a support type striker. So I like him. You look at his record and you think, well, he's never been truly prolific, but I think it's a decent goal scoring record, and it's a fairly broad body of work now for a player who's still pretty young in that the leagues that he's played at, the teams that he's played in, the different types of teams that he's played in too. So as a deadline day signing, and with Juve having been trying to sign him literally all summer, it could turn out to be a good pickup for Tottenham.
Just pivoting away from Kolo Muani for a minute, another player that Spurs were linked with, I don't know how far this ever got, but it looks like a real talent in Serie A, was Nico Paz at Como. Tell us about him, because Spurs have a habit of going back for players. We've got a bit of a thing with Real Madrid as well. Where does his future lie? Tell us about him as a player, and is it just a done deal that he's going to go to Madrid?
It looks like it, and I think Como, they're a very ambitious team themselves. I mean, for people who perhaps don't watch Serie A regularly, I think maybe it's escaped some people because the way that they're investing right now and the ambition that they're showing, one of the highest spending teams in Serie A this summer. You probably saw the free kick that he scored for them recently as well, which was unbelievable technique. But I think probably his future, I would imagine he would end back up at Real Madrid. And I don't think there's been any... I've just literally back from my daughter's football training, so I'm not fully up to date on any transfers. I don't know if he's been involved in anything tonight. I'd be seriously surprised if he had been. But I think he probably will end up back at Real Madrid. And, that would make sense because he's a player I think he's capable of playing for a team of that size. And he's really improving. I have to say I was surprised that I ever saw that link taken particularly seriously, if I'm honest, because I knew that Como would not be looking to let him go. I mean, you only have to look at how hard or how firm Como were over Fabregas and Inter, because Inter really wanted Fabregas to replace Inzaghi, and Como were just like, no chance, you're not having him. So it didn't surprise me that they, that they would be make sure that they didn't lose one of their best players, if not their best player right now, for a side who finished 10th last season. And I think a lot of people in Italy suspect that they will seriously push to finish in the European places this season. And he's a really important part of that.
And somebody that didn't do so well at Como, but with strong Spurs connections, was Dele Alli, who I think has been released today.
Yeah, looks like
right?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about, because we've all got such affection for Dele. What happened out there with him?
Not much, to be honest, which is a really sad thing. Got sent off on his debut at San Siro, and I mean, it's just been, a really sad story. I mean, I think it's terrible to see such a talent at still such a relatively young age just disappearing. And I mean, he's obviously somebody that's had got his well documented challenges, which again I thought he was really brave actually in what he did in terms of speaking out about that. Yeah. But I think he probably hoped that going somewhere like Italy, where a lot of British players have gone recently and really rejuvenated careers or careers have kicked on. And I would imagine that might well have been the idea, to see, can I change of scenery, a new country, a thriving league, an up and coming manager? Will that help me kickstart my career? And look, I can't sort of give you the reasons as to why that hasn't happened. Dele Alli would be the only person, I suppose, who could truly tell you why it hasn't happened. But in answer to your question, basically nothing's happened. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's not really anything to say other than, it's being sent off on his debut was the biggest headlines it made, really.
And final question from me again. Another player that was heavily linked with Tottenham, particularly in the last couple of days, was Lookman. Nothing seems to have happened. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think he's gone anywhere. No. He made it quite clear he wanted to leave Atalanta.
Screams 6 months or a year in Turkey, doesn't it?
What's the situation with him? Why is he so desperate to get away, and why has nobody taken him up?
Well, he'd wanted to leave previously and was persuaded to stay for another season, which he did. And then during that season, there was a very public falling out with Gasperini, who was critical of his penalty-taking skills after a Champions League
Not Panenka
game.
Again, was it?
Yeah, I don't think it was actually. I just think I'm trying to remember if it got saved or what happened, but there was a big public falling out, and Gasperini it was a bit of a misstep from Gasperini, which is quite unusual for him. But it led to a very big public falling out. They patched that up, and now, of course, Gasperini has gone on to Roma. And I think from Ademola Lookman's perspective, I think it was this classic case of you told me I could go, and now you're making it difficult. We've seen that with quite a few players this summer. Why has there been no take of that? That's a difficult one to answer, because in terms of his ability and his form, you would think that there would be, because there's a really strong body of work behind him from his time in Italy. I can give you two theories as to why the number of takers might not be so broad as he might hope. One is his age, because he's knocking on his late 20s now. And if they were to sell him, they would want top whack. And it's a question of, do you want to buy a player for top whack who's at that age? Yeah. I think some Premier League clubs might be slightly put off, and I'm not saying they'd be right to do this, but they might be slightly put off with his previous Premier League experiences. So I think that could possibly play a part as well.
Salah, De Bruyne, for example, go off and come back, and other players leave the Premier League and come back. And
it did come back earlier, but I was surprised to see 15 Serie A goals for him last year. I mean, that's a top return.
Yeah, and I think, look, it was a good return, and he was very important to the team. And I think another reason why I would advise any club who look at Atalanta players, or certainly in recent years, look at Atalanta players to buy, just buyer beware a little bit, because...
yeah, I agree. There's a curse. Atalanta forwards, they leave and then they do nothing. It's very, very strange.
Well, I think part of it is because the way that Gasperini sets up his teams and the way that he plays with the man marking all over the pitch, it means that players they're drilled to within an inch of their lives in terms of how they're expected to play. And they begin to flourish within the certainty of a system. So they all know exactly what's expected of them, what they're to do when the ball's here, what they're to do when this person moves to this place. So when they're then taken out of that system and they have to play in a different system, I think with some of them, it's almost like their brain scrambles a bit. And we've seen that with several players, not every player who's left a Gasperini side, but we have seen it with some. I mean, a very high profile example of last season was Turncoat Miners, who went for a big fee from Atalanta to Juventus and was nowhere near the level of player that he had been at Atalanta. So that I'm trying to sort of think here as to why clubs might be a little reluctant, but there's three reasons. And maybe another is that Inter had made it quite clear that they wanted him. I don't know why that's not gone through, whether it was a disagreement over the fee, where they've not been able to reach an agreement. But there would have been perhaps other clubs who've maybe done business thinking, well, we may as well forget Lookman. We're not going to get him. He's going to Inter. And it's ended up, looks like he isn't going to Inter. So there's a few reasons why he might still be available. But I tend to agree with what you said. It probably at this stage has got Turkey or Saudi written all over it at the moment.
Ad, thank you so much for all that. I love tapping into your Serie A knowledge. Unfortunately, we've not got a Serie A team in our Champions League draw, so we'll speak to you before we play Inter in the final. But until then, I might see you around work very soon. But thank you so much for joining us, and great to get your thoughts.
Pleasure. Nice to speak to you.
Cheers, Adam.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.